Can we show the video of the New York City rioters? Oh, actually, two here. Here we have a video of the scene where rioters are disrupting, I believe, patrons of a restaurant, frightening them, breaking things, driving them out, chastising them publicly. And
that was in New York, you said?
Yep, that's in Rochester. And then can we see the march in New York? So here you have people. We can't hear this.
Oh, is that the chant about burning all the precincts down?
Yes, every city, every town, burn the precincts to the ground. And then there was a Death to America banner in there. So this is sort of announcing what their plans are. Now, I've heard people say that this is being funded by those who want Trump to win. Certainly possible. On the other hand, you don't need that because the numbskulls who hold this anarchist ideology are perfectly capable of saying insane things like this in advance of an election, either as an accelerationist move or just out of pure stupidity. But the point is they are setting us up for a Trump win one way or the other, one way or the other. And I think we should increasingly expect it. And I think those who think that that's the end of the world should start thinking outside the box, because you know what? Your party fucked up. Your party delivered you an answer that can't beat that.
Yeah, no, that is unfortunately right. Let's riff on this from 1984 for a couple of minutes.
Wonderful.
Shall we? Page 3.
Okay, everybody turn your hymnals to page 3.
I don't know why books are paginated this way. It says page 5, but it starts on page 3. So early in 1984, the famous and important book by George Orwell, written in 1949 originally, I think. Yep. We have the Ministry of Truth, Mini-True in Newspeak, was startlingly different from any other object in sight. It was an enormous pyramidal structure of glittering white concrete, soaring up, terrace after terrace, 300 meters into the air. From where Winston stood, it was just possible to read, picked out on its white face in elegant lettering, the 3 slogans of the party. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. Those are the 3 slogans of the party that we hear about in the rest of this unfortunately prescient book. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength.
So my claim is that we have achieved 2 of these 3, that we are now regularly hearing that war is peace, not in those terms, but the term mostly peaceful, as we have covered here before, basically means that anything, anyone who wishes to portray violence as peaceful simply has to emphasize the percentage of time or the percentage of locales or whatever metric you want to use to game the statistic means that it is peaceful. So if you could show, why don't you show that headline I sent you, and then show us the document on which it's based. So here, The Guardian, and you can find this in many different publications. Nearly all Black Lives Matter protests are peaceful despite Trump narrative, report finds. So it is Trump that is portraying these things as violent. And
so I have a couple of screenshots from that document.
Yeah, please show them.
Okay. So here, an overwhelmingly peaceful movement. Oh, actually, turn this off for a second, Zach. Before we go there, this document, let me see if I can find it, is, sorry, just published. It's from September 2020. Okay, you can show this now, Zach, for just a moment. This is Demonstrations and Political Violence in America, New Data for Summer 2020. And it presumes to be a very measured and careful sort of data-forward, data-centered type analysis. Turn off my screen for a moment, Zach. And let me just show a couple of screenshots from this. Here we go. An overwhelmingly peaceful movement, it concludes. The vast majority of demonstration events associated with the BLM movement are non-violent. I'll show you the map in a minute. In more than 93% of all demonstrations connected to the movement, demonstrators have not engaged in violence or destructive activity. Peaceful protests are reported in over 2,400 distinct locations around the country. Violent demonstrations, meanwhile, have been limited to fewer than 220 locations, under 10% of the areas that experience peaceful protests. In many urban areas like Portland, Oregon, for example, which has seen sustained unrest since Floyd's killing, violent demonstrations are largely confined to specific blocks rather than dispersed throughout the city. Here they reference the unassailable source that is CNN, as if that is going to be trustworthy here. And here is one of the maps of their conclusions. This is an organization that says that they share all their data, but interestingly, none of these data appear to be findable on their site at the moment. So it's really hard for me to figure out how it is that they have assessed how many demonstrations there have been, for instance, or whether or not the demonstration type has been a protest or a riot. In Portland, for instance, there have been, I can't remember the numbers, but some number of nights, the nightly thing that goes from relatively peaceful to really, really not, which has been like clockwork every night. Some number of those, by no means a majority and certainly not all, have been declared riots by the police. But to a observer thinking, does that look like a riot to me? Pretty much every night there's been something somewhere in Portland that looked like a riot. How many of those were actually called riots? Now, we have on this map, a big orange circle that is orange over Portland, which suggests that there were, yes, indeed, a lot of riots. But without access to the data, we have no way of assessing how it is that they concluded these numbers.
Oh, and I suspect that they do not invoke the term riot based on the behavior, that they invoke it based on whether a riot has been declared. And I can tell you, one of the things I learned watching the protests here in Portland was that there are all kinds of things that are clearly a riot that the police do not declare a riot for some reason that has to do with the way they're policing them. Yep. But lots of violence goes on outside of the category riot. I would also, if you can go back to that map.
The map. Okay, here we go.
Yeah. You can also see that even the idea of peaceful protests is a phony story, because mostly what went on was the growing of GMO corn, right? That's not a protest. That doesn't even involve people. Right. So they're selling this. Well, but they're very focused on the idea that protests were a big story, but protests are a result of the news bias in favor of protests. You haven't seen the growing of corn reported on the news, but on a percentage basis, you can see based on this map, a large amount of that territory is dedicated to the growing of crops, which you almost never hear about. So
I honestly have no idea what you're talking about.
I'm using their rubric,
okay.
Right, where they're going to declare stuff peaceful because, they haven't gotten around to the rioting, for example. And my point is the idea that we focus on, you and I will focus on the fact that, as I think every night but one for the last 90-some, has involved violence in Portland. Mm-hmm. That would suggest a large percentage of what goes on in Portland is like the run-up to violence or violence itself, right? But the idea that it was mostly peaceful because there were many hours in which there was no violence, and the city is overwhelmingly not involved in any protests whatsoever.
A lot of peaceable eating of breakfast burritos.
Right. My point is an intuitive rubric here, where the point is, there's been violence every night in Portland for the last 90? That sounds kind of unusually violent. Right? Rather than, it was mostly peaceful. By what rubric? And my point is, if we're going to do everything by this mind-numbing, statistical analysis that pretends to be quantitative on the basis that most of what it was not violent, as I pointed out on a previous live stream, the motorcade in Dallas in 1963 was overwhelmingly peaceful. I mean, why anybody even reports on the violence is hard to understand.
Yeah, clearly bias in reporting.
Right. And my point is, the same analysis suggests that what's being ignored is the growing of corn in favor of news that focus on protests, because there's a lot more growing of corn than there is protesting.
You think it's the corn lobby that's behind this?
Oh, geez. I fear my point has been lost, but... But yes. So anyway, back to the point. Yeah. The point is, war is peace
Yep.
This is a statistical version of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Mostly peaceful is a way to ignore the violence, right? Now, ignorance is, remind me.
Freedom is slavery is the second one, and ignorance is strength.
Yes, ignorance is strength. We have also achieved this one, right? Shut down STEM. The Enlightenment is a white thing. Logic is a tool of white oppression.
Math is a tool of white supremacy.
Math is a tool of white supremacy. All of these things are an attack on reason, right? And so they are an embrace of ignorance, obviously. For what purpose? For the purpose of wielding power. So here we've got two of the slogans on that pyramid, and we've fully achieved them. Now, freedom is slavery. I don't think we're quite there yet, but we're headed there, right? We're definitely headed there, because what we have are people putting other people through struggle sessions on the basis that what comes out of this will be the liberation that we all seek, right? Through the admission of things that aren't true. So I don't think we have quite as clean an example on that one, but at some level, we know that we are engaged in the process that Orwell was responding to, because the match between the things we are now contemplating and the slogans on the pyramid, which seem beyond, ridiculous, the match is just too damn close.
Yeah, it is.